Yo, check the mic, 1, 2. This ain't no illusion, it's the ancient gods demanding your attention. Museius, listen up, this knowledge is gold. How to pay respect, stories untold. Zeus, Gaia, Helios, the moon and the stars. Neptune, ruler of the seas behind prison bars. Ceres bringing the harvest. Persephone too, queen of the underworld with a hellish crew. Artemis, the huntress, Apollo's bright rays. Dionysus, the life of the party, always in the days. Ed Ray's got a war with Vulcan the smith. Aphrodite, born of the ocean, the goddess myth. Hades, king of shadows where the lost souls reside. He be forever young, Hercules by her side. Elathea, bringer of life, new souls ignite. Justice and piety shining ever so bright. Nymphs and Pan, the wild ones roaming free. Hera the queen, never seen memory. The grace is the hours keeping time and they dance. Leto, mother of gods, given a second chance. Curities, household guardians protecting the heart. Soteroi, offspring of Zeus, showing their worth. Idean gods, angels above them, be so wise. Night and day, faith and justice before our eyes. Chronos and Rhea, titans of old. They kiss the sea, nymph stories yet untold. Oceanus, the river flowing round the world's spine. Atlas holding it up for all of time. Aeon, eternity, Chronos, endless.
We're gonna get right into it then. Can you hear me all right? Give me a check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. See if you can actually hear me. If you can't hear the music, I wonder if you can even hear me. Anyone? Anyone alive out there? See if you can actually hear me. If you can't hear the music. Okay, well, I'm checking my phone to see if it's streaming the right way for me. You're gonna have to bear with me for a second while I figure out these technical.
Endless time sticks, the river of oaths, a power sublime. Daemon spirits that guide in the air, earth, and fire. Providence watching over, taking us higher. Dionysus and Semele, a love so true. Look at the.
Just checking a couple texts right now, guys. Give me a second. Oh, there was music playing. Okay. Thanks, Tara. There was music playing. It was awesome. Anyways, how's it going, guys? We're going to jump right into it, okay? Today, we are going to go into the Orphic Rhapsodies. Some of the things that I have been pondering, some of the things that I've put into some of my videos that have been somewhat controversial. But there's a rhyme and a reason to this whole thing. There isn't just me smashing two texts together, and I'm going to show you very clearly today the differences and the similarities between the two texts. But first, we're going to start off with a little bit about Orphism, a little bit about what they believed, and then see how that kind of influenced some of the other religions that would follow and some of the other mystical traditions that would follow Orphism, and kind of just get into this whole thing. I'm going to do a couple of live streams about this. We're going to kind of focus on the beginning of this, the Rhapsodic Theogonies, and then from there, we're going to go through each one of the reigns and try to keep them in tandem with some of the video releases that I'll be doing in the future, because so far I've done the reign of Phanes and the reign of Nyx. But next, I am going to do the reign of Oranos. But this is going to be a little bit more of a deeper dive into the text and just live so you guys can interact with me. So let's get right to it. I'm going to share my screen because I got a little presentation for you. All right. Can you see that? All right. Just making sure everybody can see the screen. Again, checking text. Text can often be fickle. All right, I can see it's working on my phone, so I'm just going to get into it. So we're going to be talking about the Orphic Rhapsodies today. We're going to be unveiling the secrets of these mystery cults. So, Orphic mysteries, they're basically based on a mystery religion which was founded by the theologian Orpheus. Orpheus is a mythic character, but is often treated as a religious character with many of the largest voices in Greek philosophy, Greek theology. He's right up there with Homer, with Hesiod. Sometimes, and more often than not, depending upon what perspective you're looking at, is going to be more important and have more weight to all of his statements, all of his texts than the others. Basically, Orpheus is the OG dude, the first guy. You kind of put him on par with the way that the Hebrews put Moses. Moses is their theologian, the first theologian, and that's just kind of how it is with them. A little bit about me. My name's Frater OD. I'm an occult philosopher, author, and practicing syncretic magician with a deep passion for exploring Greek mystery traditions, Kemetic traditions, and many others. Right now, my current obsession is Orphism. I'm really deep into it, so I want to share that with you, and that's what we're here doing today. So this is one that I haven't gotten into too much yet, except for those two videos. But I'm hoping that we can get into it a little more today. So Orphism starts back 6th century BCE is the first couple of traces of it. But as with all things within traditions, mystery traditions, it's very difficult to date because we have writings and then we have oral traditions. And most people are going to understand this, but oral traditions, we don't have a way to trace how far back these traditions go. And you can see how things change within the traditions once writing starts to be accompanied. Um, Many of the things that we'll be exploring in this video, the fragments are written way later than 6th century BC. We're talking 100 BC with some things. Plato's going to mention a lot of it, Pythagoras even before him, but it's interspersed over, it's kind of just like delivered over time. And what's interesting about this is we can track how it changes, how it intermingles with Greek mythology and the theology of that time, and then how it starts to interact when we get into more interesting times where like the birth of Christianity, the times of Jesus are right thereafter when the church fathers are getting Christianity going. We see massive overlap between Orphism and Christianity, and we'll kind of get into that, and that's what the whole point of this is. So 6th century BCE is the earliest kind of time that we can basically pinpoint Orphism. But even centuries after, we start to see that it's got a lasting influence on Greek tradition in general. And even Plato frequently references things like this. There's a really great book by Algis Us Divinis, and I'm sure I butchered that, and I'm still trying to learn Greek, but it's a behemoth of a language, and so it's very difficult. And between content creation and all this other stuff and study, not a ton of time to get it in there, but I'm trying. Um, so Plato, the book by Algis talks about the Platonic roots of Orphism, or the Platonic, or the Orphic roots of Platonism. Sorry, got that backwards. It's littered throughout Plato. He talks about these things mostly because Pythagoras does, and other philosophers do before Plato. It's just by the time of Plato, Orpheus, the theologian, is someone that you can start making a statement about something and say, well, Orpheus says this, and it basically acts as proof that there is some validity to it. So we see this all the time. Slapping Orpheus's name on something basically gives you street cred in the ancient world. This particular idea that I have that I'm writing down now in 2nd century BCE, I'm going to put Orpheus's name on it, and now it's got validity. And so that's just something interesting to pay attention to as we go through this. Even Aristotle writes about him, although Aristotle, being quite different than Plato in his own right, tends to reference Orpheus in different ways, contradicting some of the things, or trying to point out some of the superstitions of Orpheus. And so it's interesting to see what he has to write about. Another person that we get a lot from is Pausanias. He's a travel writer, geographer, and he basically goes through all of Greece talking about the different things that he sees. He's second century, and he's got some really interesting things that he claims to have seen. So we're kind of talking about it again here. We've got Plato, Aristotle, Pausanias, Proclus, and the Neoplatonists are the primary source of the fragments that we're going to be talking about today. Most of this comes from Proclus and others like Damascius, Olympiodorus, and there's quite a few that come down to us from Christians who were basically grappling with the fact that many of their specific doctrines and dogmas that they were developing around the same time, they wanted to show how different they were. So they would use Orpheus in such a way to show the barbarity or the superstition of the quote unquote pagan belief, and how they somehow differed with their own doctrine. Like, we believe in a very similar thing, this idea of original sin, these sorts of things, but we want to divorce ourselves from that. So you see a lot of them basically utilizing Orpheus, but kind of flipping the script and saying, this is how you can see we're different from Orpheus and from the Orphics. But let's talk a little bit about this kind of challenge that is presented to old school Olympian religion. Now, Orphism intermingles into it by this time and is no longer necessarily a fringe element. It's interlaced within a lot of the Hesiodic theogonies that are being taught in the cults or even in the Platonic Academy. But originally, it was kind of a completely different story than what the traditional cults were talking about. There was a different cosmology, a different way of looking at how the universe came into being, a different way that the gods come into being. We see massive differences between, say, the way that Hesiod says that things happen and the way that the Orphic Rhapsodies say that things happen. There's much more of a focus on the soul. Orpheus and his theology has this fixation on what the soul does after death, and what the soul can acquire on its body, so to speak, in the course of life, which leads to a different ethical dimension than what you see traditionally within some of the Homeric ethics. Homer focuses a lot on excellence and arete, they call it, heroic value, virtue, these sorts of things. Plato talks about this too with the cardinal virtues, and Orphism adds to that. So there's a very strong ethical dimension that talks about what you're supposed to be doing. So, for instance, there was a high level of vegetarianism, or not eating animal matter within Orphism and Pythagoreanism, and sometimes they get mixed up. Pythagoreanism is different than Orphism, but they have a ton of overlap. So more often than not, people kind of lump them together, which is not necessarily always the case. And there is this radical revelation of underworld descents and in the mystery religion undergoing these mysterious rites that take you to the underworld and purify your soul so that you can basically stop this idea of reincarnation. There wasn't so much an idea of reincarnation within traditional or Hesiodic theology, or the mystery cults, or the cults that were basically the mainstream at that time. And so what we're looking at here is a massive difference, that when you die, you will come back based on the virtues you displayed within life. You will come back in a different form. And there's definitely some overlap between what we see in the Vedas. So there's a root belief that is shared between Greece, between Egypt, and between the Harappan cultures, and everything that comes out of the Indus Valley in India too. This idea goes way farther back, but it is a unique injection, so to speak, into Greek thought. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because this is kind of important when we get into the Rhapsodies. They believe in the reincarnation and the immortal soul, which is somewhat separate from the body. They believe in personal responsibility and accountability and some sort of spiritual destiny too, which is interesting because you have the idea of the fates there. And they are interested in breaking the cycle of rebirth through rites and purification, which generally happens when you achieve henosis, or mystical union with the divine, through some sort of purification rite or through some sort of practice. Now, we don't know a ton about what they were doing, but we can look through some of the fragments and see if there's some indications. I believe Pausanias talks about it in his geography biographies, his accounts as he's traveling around Greece, what he sees. But as someone who's not initiated into the mysteries, we are dealing with someone who doesn't have the full picture. And so that's interesting, but we can get kind of an exterior look at what they might have been doing. And eventually I'll probably get to talking about that. So Orphism also influences the Eleusinian mysteries and vice versa. They're both katabatic in nature, which means there's an underworld descent that is undertaken. Eleusis has the greater and lesser mysteries. Now, I have not come across greater and lesser mysteries within the Orphic tradition, but again, this is something that we're piecing together, so it's very difficult to say with authority what they were doing at any given time. Everybody has their opinions, and we'll get into those. It has its impact on Pythagorean philosophy as well, and vice versa, and Plato. It's this giant melting pot going on in the Mediterranean, and so it's difficult to say where something comes from because you can see traces of it within all of them. A lot of what you see in Greek thought is, quite honestly, sometimes copied from the Kemetic or the Egyptian traditions, and or Near Eastern traditions. So basically what the Greeks called Phoenicia or Canaanite religion has a massive influence on Orphism, and we can kind of see where those where that kind of comes in, because if you compare it side by side with Hesiod, Hesiod is very Greek, and Orpheus has a lot of that Near Eastern stuff. It's probably an influence of geography too. Orpheus is said to come from somewhere in Samos or Thrace, like a Thracian ancestry, and that, as we know, is a little bit closer to what people are doing over in Turkey and Anatolia. Also, massive influence on later religions, including hugely influential on Neoplatonism. And most of what we're going to be looking at today is viewed through a Neoplatonistic lens. So most of what comes down to us, I mentioned before, is from the Neoplatonists, particularly Proclus. He has a lot of the preservation there, but others do speak about it as well. Damascius, Olympiodorus, and others. Concurrently, Gnosticism is going on within the Mediterranean, and so is early Christianity. So you have three kind of fringe elements that are not a part of mainstream society that are building up what they're talking about, and they're all talking about very similar things. This idea of the soul, this idea of purification, this idea of ascension in some way, shape, or form, to break free of karmic cycles. It's a very prevalent idea in Gnosticism. We're trying to break away from the archons. And the Neoplatonists, their interest in theurgy is a little different, but you can see trace elements of Orphism in their philosophy as well. So where do we get a lot of these fragments from? Specifically, what I want to talk about is we're going to be talking a lot about Otto Kern, who's a professor of classics. I forget where I had it in my notes, but we're just going to keep moving. And from Proclus. These are where we get most of what we're talking about today, and they've been smashed together, ripped apart, put back together, just like the Bible and the biblical text that I was comparing it to. So today we're going to go through the prologue, and we're going to compare the creation myth of the Orphic Rhapsodies to Genesis. and we're just going to get into it, man. I have a whole bunch of stuff here that's written down. I was kind of rushing this. Sorry, guys, but here we go. And so I'm going to read some of this out loud, and I'm going to stop on the interesting pieces because it's kind of interesting and imperative that we do look at a few of these things. Um, I'm just going to make sure I've got all my stuff settled right here because I'm going to be referencing a couple of things off screen for you guys. So he says, "Come, son of Leto, golden haired Apollon, whose will echoes the father of gods and men, illuminate my mind. Come, Mnemosyne, wise queen, and awaken things learned long ago, things which beg to again come to light." So, whoever is writing this fragment obviously is working with something older than themselves. There are stories being told. Often in the Orphic tradition, there are people saying that there is a specific um, poem or a specific text that they're referencing. Others reference that there's a bunch of these things going on. There's quite a few different Orphic poems, epic poems going around. And so it's very difficult to know where they're getting this from. And also, what's interesting is that this person, whoever's writing this fragment right here, is asking the muses in some shape or form, and Mnemosyne being kind of associated with that, the queen of memory, says, "Bring this forth, bring this forth, bring it to light. Our minds are darkened with clouds, and our hearts are downtrodden, tormented by mundane trials which never end." Now, that's poetic, isn't it? It isn't. Oh man, I just got a message that said the people can't hear me. No. Did you fail me again? Did you fail me again, technology? Well, I'm just gonna keep rolling because we're recording and I can always run it back. Um, So he says, "Our minds are darkened with clouds, and our hearts are downtrodden, tormented by mundane trials which never end. Console us and tell us something splendid that we may triumph over our interminable tribulations." Our interminable tribulations. That's beautiful. So obviously, whoever is piecing this together is like we need help. We need help. There's something going on, which is interesting because at that time there's a lot of oh okay, good. Good. I'm glad you guys can hear me. Sorry. I will get the hang of this live stream thing. It's just it's new. It's new. So you're gonna have to bear with me. So this time where these fragments might have been being passed around, this time of a few centuries, was a time of great upheaval. You have the Greek city states are constantly kind of at each other. You have the emergence of Rome, you have the emergence of Gnosticism, the emergence of Christianity. There's a lot of different ideas, and there's no central dogma, right? And I think that's really interesting because you see this in Gnosticism and you see this in early Christianity. They all believe in this kind of apocalyptic time. There's something being revealed, something needs to change, something is going on within all of these writings, and it becomes really evident. So he continues, "Oh, lovely many-formed Musai, guide my heart and guide my hands that I might retrieve the marvelous narrative given to us long ago by the great theologian Orpheus, who sang with a lyre of gold. The genesis, interesting, of the greatest of the blessed deathless gods, those born from earth and the blood of Oranos." Now, it's interesting that he goes straight in the first part to the blood of Oranos. And I was reading about this last night from Meisner's PhD philosophy, the birth tradition and birth of the Orphic gods. Um, I butchered that. Sorry. Um, there are some people who believe that there are 4 reigns within the Orphic mythos. It starts with Oranos, goes to Kronos, goes to Zeus, and then to Dionysus. But then we see that there's this other thing that happens once the Neoplatonists get their hands on it. Once they get their hands on it, they start adding stuff and they go back in time because they want to find the first principle, the first cause of the universe. That's what they're seeking. And so the introduction of night and Phanes is going to be an addition of the Neoplatonists, um, potentially. We don't know for sure, but that's what Meisner was kind of theorizing when I was reading last night, and I thought that was really interesting as we get into this. The genesis of the greatest of the blessed and deathless gods. Then these thoughts appeared in the aether of my mind. Interesting drop there on aether because we're going to be talking about the creation of the the ether, the aether, that is basically the heavens, and how that relates to our mind. Later on, we also see that Oranos is related to the mind. It says, take the fragments scattered in the texts of those who unwittingly hid them. So there isn't necessarily like an accident happening here. It might be accidental. It's interesting. I don't know what to do with that one there. Those who unwittingly hid them. Arrange their content in a mighty poem, easy to understand for the pious, yet obscure to the profane. So we've got an esoteric and an exoteric element happening here. That it might give solace once again to the souls of the virtuous mortals, of yours and future generations, who are able to perceive the beauty concealed within the story it tells. So it takes a bit of work. You can't just read it literally. You got to dig into it. You've got to go really deep into the text and you got to kind of just jimmy your way up in there, because if you read it like everybody reads all these texts just on the exterior, then you're just getting a literal reading. And this is how you get things like fundamentalism and the very dangerous things that I want to bring some light to. And thus I, one not special at all, begin my holy task. May the gods make obvious, graceful, and lovely words worthy of its content. Now, this is interesting. This whole prologue is kind of like a proem, which you see at the beginning of epic poems. There is a calling to the muses. Please guide my hand as I try to coagulate all of these different pieces. One of the theories is that within the Orphic poems, that there's many of them out there, right? There's a ton of them. There's not like a singular one, so we can't look at it as this one giant poem. But what people are trying to do at this time is codify them, put them into a story that can be utilized to teach what Orpheus taught all those centuries before, right? Remember, we think it starts around 6th century BCE. It's probably much older, through the oral tradition. So I want to get into comparing these texts side by side, because what I think was really missed in my video, which I'm not sure that a bunch of those fundamentalists who commented and were really upset actually watched the video. They just saw the title and said blah 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 blah. It's not that way. Well, I'm going to show you right here. So if you're watching, this is it right here. Okay. Orpheus says, what was at the very beginning cannot be explained or understood. It can only be spoken of indirectly because there is no way to comprehend something in which its points of differentiation have yet to be expressed. It is called the beginning, which cannot be spoken. What he's talking about here is we can't talk about the ineffable. We cannot talk about it at all. Yet we try to talk about it in every single religion. Every single religion thinks they have the idea of what God is, what this highest principle is, but no one can describe it with words. And that's our primary mode of communication. It's how we try to transfer these ideas between people. And so it's very difficult for us to talk about if we can't use words. Now, what we're talking about more often than not when we're talking about God is everything that happens underneath God. Everything in the hierarchy underneath God is what we can talk about. But everything above that is completely ineffable. And people mistake the ineffable for the demiurge more often than not. In all of these religions, the demiurge, the creator, the craftsman that happens is not God the ineffable. The thing at the beginning of time, the thing at the beginning of all of this is not the same thing. And so when a religion says that our God is named this, they're talking about a demiurgic creator through a cultural perspective. They're not talking about God. So essentially, what's funny is with all of these specific I don't know, fundamentalists, is essentially what they're engaging in is the same thing they're accusing me of. It's idolatry. Calling God Yahweh is idolatry. And probably going to catch some hate for that, but it's the truth. So what does Genesis say? Genesis 1, when Elohim began to create heaven and earth. So it doesn't even talk about the ineffable whatsoever. It just begins at the beginning. Okay, so already we can see the Orphics have a much deeper understanding of what's going on here than the Hebrew text. There could be some interesting bits about that. Hebrew's a very compact language, and there aren't as many words, whereas Greek, you've got 10 times the amount of words at your disposal, so you can explain things a little bit differently. But in Hebrew specifically, you are using the same word for multiple different things, so it's very difficult to see what they're talking about in many cases. But in this case, we've got some info. Elohim. Now, it later becomes a term associated with a monotheistic creator, but originally what we're talking about here is a plurality of deities or a plurality of divinities, gods, could be angels, could be a reference to the gods that are later involved in the demiurgic process. But that's where it begins in Genesis, when Elohim began to create heaven and earth. Orpheus continues because Genesis stops right there. It is not created. It did not come to be. It has always been. It is there before anything else. It is there at the beginning, and it is now and will always be. This suggests an eternity. This suggests something that is eternal. Whereas what we're seeing in this, when Elohim began to create heaven and earth, that is the beginning of time in a very linear construct. And that's what I think most people get tripped up on, is they start looking at it as there was a beginning and there is going to be an end. And that is very, what's the word? Revealing about apocalypse theology, is that they believe that there is a linear construct happening here. But what the Orphics are telling us is that this is eternal. This whole thing is just is going to keep going forever. There is no end. So as you can see, Genesis 1:1, that's what we're looking at. Now let's move on. Orpheus, the founder of the mysteries, tells us that within this undifferentiated mixture of earth and water, it is from the dance of these two that everything which comes to be is basically made of, right? Genesis 1:2, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeps over the water. What are we looking at here side by side? Earth and water, an undifferentiated mixture. Unformed, darkness over the water, water and earth. Both of them are reflecting the same two elements. The beginning, basically patterns, wavelengths, matters, materials. In both stories, earth and water are stated. Now, of course, I got this text cut off here, so I'm going to have to go find it. But Orpheus continues, and he says, for ageless time, Chronos was moved by necessity, Ananke, and they gave birth to Aether, and a limitless chasm. So chasm often is a reference to chaos, which extended in every direction, and everything was in tumult. In the Aether, time formed a silvery egg, the offspring of Aether and chaos. So there's like kind of like a double thing happening here. Time and Ananke. Time is the kind of the Neoplatonic first god, the first cause. They try to give it a name, which I think is funny because they talk about everything as ineffable. but they were just they had to have a name for some reason. And I could be wrong about this. Again, I am not an academic. This is just something that I practice and I'm trying to share with you. And I'd love to have an academic to come on the show and talk to me about this stuff, because hopefully that's where we're going. But it's interesting. Time and necessity, these are the first two causes happening within the chaos of the universe. Time as kind of a capsule, and necessity as movement. So time is the womb along with the chasm. It's kind of producing a barrier. So it's the first differentiation between ununified or completely unified form. There is this time element, and then we have movement, necessity. Something has to happen. Necessity is later going to be associated with desire, with Eros, Aphrodite as well. And so these things are swirling. There's this kind of swirling, and it's interesting to me because this is what we know is happening in physics within this idea of the Big Bang. There's this swirling. There's this undifferentiated mix of material that explodes outwards, and there is this movement that generates it. So it says the egg is the offspring of aether and chaos. Now, what aether and chaos are limit and unlimited. So another set of differentiations begin to happen, and it suggests that there is a container being built within this process. And we see over here in Genesis 1:2 the same thing. There is a darkness, a tumult, there's chaos, but a wind from God sweeps over the water. A wind from Elohim, again, from these divinities, not from a monotheistic creator, from these divinities. Again, we see over here time, Chronos, Ananke, Aether, chaos. 4 different divinities actively forming something. And the egg began to move in an enormous and wondrous circle. And from the egg, Phanes emerged and was born. And the aether and the chasm were torn apart. A wind from God sweeping over the water. Now, later, Epicurus talks about the swirling of Chronos and Ananke, of time and necessity, as a serpentiform wind. A serpentiform wind. The idea of the serpent is very interesting, and we'll get into that later because it's just all throughout the Orphic mythos, and it's also within the Hebrew and the Christian lore, right? You see the serpent in the garden, you see the serpent all through it, right? Although one side looks at it as bad and the other side looks at it as part of creation or knowledge. So from this swirling, from this breath of God, from the breath of gods, plural, we see this egg formed, and then it is constricted and cracked. And from that cracking of that egg is born light. Light. Oh, come on. Here we go. Go back. Oh, I missed it. Just a second. I need to learn how to use this stuff. There we go. Nope. Okay. Here we go. Behold the son of Aether, the firstborn, Protogonos, the shining one, who by his nature illumines everything and was the first to appear in the Aether. Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So the gods are sitting here talking about let there be light. We see it again in the Orphic. Now they stop there in Genesis. They're just like, there's light now. But we're told a little bit more about the principle of light itself. It says, "Witness his 4 eyes looking everywhere and marvel at his 4 horns. Behold his golden wings which flutter all about. He bellows like a massive bull and roars like a lion. He is Erechipaios, both male and female, who harbors in his heart blind and swift Aros. He is Metis, the progenitor of the gods, who call him the revealer and the firstborn. He is the one with the mighty voice, Bromios. He is all-seeing Zeus, or Panoptus, Zeus." So we're getting characteristics here of the demiurge, and it's interesting because the demiurge the demiurge is a complicated thing within the Orphic myth. In Gnosticism, you see one. They usually call it Yaldabaoth, and in the Hebrew scriptures, it's the god that later gets retrofitted to this polytheistic narrative. But the Orphics are giving us crazy amounts of detail about this particular being and what it is like, and it reveals a lot as we move forward in the text. Zeus takes on a lot of these characteristics later, and what we'll find is that he kind of absorbs them when he gets to his reign. But we've got this idea of golden wings, which is a symbol that is throughout the Bible. We've got a set of thanks, Tara. I appreciate that love. Um, I have a mind like that, but I don't have the papers, so I can't really call myself that. Um, Erechopaios is a very interesting piece because it's both an epithet, a title, but also an object that has mathematical value, as we see later. It's basically, they talk about how it is created in 24 pieces, and so this is a Neoplatonic thing where they're trying to measure the universe, and they're trying to show how the universe is built through their triadic systems. Um, but this idea of Erechopaios as a title, as the one that will be passed down between the successions of kings, is really interesting, which suggests that there is more than one deity at work here. But again, it's not different necessarily from, yes, 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 son, Zeus was very hungry. There's not a huge difference, again, between this monotheistic narrative and the polytheistic narrative, or this pantheistic narrative. There really isn't. There's an ineffable thing that we can't talk about, this first cause, that if we talk about it, we fuck it up, we mess it up. Excuse me, YouTube, I didn't mean to curse. We mess it up when we start to talk about it. Now, it's just like they just inverted the pieces. Two different people were like, nope, it's a one thing that created all things. Well, I said that too. I just said it in different words, and through a different cultural perspective. The other thing we know about Phanes, he's a revealer. Light is revealing the differentiated stuff that exists within the darkness. This goes back to Plato's realm of forms. He says that everything within the realm of forms is already there in eternity. And so what Phanes is doing is, by shining light, is showing the differentiation between them that already exists. So there's already stuff there before this illumination, before Phanes cracks the egg, or Kronos and Ananke crack the egg. It's different sometimes. Sometimes Phanes just kind of busts out himself, depending upon the fragment. The light spills over into the darkness and starts to reveal forms. So it's an example of the one exploding into many or myriad forms. Oh, I did it again. Ah, there we go. So he can be seen only by his daughter, but his effulgent light shining in the aether draws wonder for those who behold it, illuminating the world with great brilliance. Again, talking about this light shining on the world. What does Genesis have to say of it? Well, Genesis 1:4 says, God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. The act of light as a thing of physics, as a thing of differentiation, shows us that there is a difference. There is some differentiation happening. God called the light day and called the darkness night. Now, day, when we get into some of the Orphic and or Hesiodic lore, is Hemera. So it's like Hebrew saying that day is created here. Maybe we don't. It doesn't say that in the Orphics, but as you can see, these parallels, they have different elements to them. So maybe Genesis is telling us that day is created at this time too. Hard to say, because I don't see it within the Orphic to verify it, or vice versa, right? So what we're looking at is they're filling in the gaps for each other. as we go through this. But we do see a crucial thing here: evening, then morning. Darkness precedes light every time within this narrative. Darkness first, light second. In Genesis 1:5, that's the first day. So the days of creation relate to the reigns of the different successions of kings in Orphism. And that is, I thought, was just like, that was the first thing that kind of keyed me into it. I always look at things in numbers. So when I'm reading a lot of this stuff, it's all numerical. Thank you, Papus, and thank you, Pythagoras, for drilling that into my brain. Everything is um, numerically built first. And so when we're looking at these texts, keep numbers in mind because they're going to be really important for you. So what does Phanes do? He caused a great many things to occur. He built an everlasting dwelling for the immortal gods. He brought forth the moon, the gods call Selene, and the mortals call Mene, with mountains, cities, and mansions. And for the ephemeral beings, he made a world separate from the immortals, with natural laws and a sun as their lord. Neither too cold nor too hot, but appropriate for their needs. These things he, Erechapaios, the first king, made from his seat in the misty darkness of the cave, Anthron of his daughter Nyx. What's Genesis talking about? Same time, two different conversations. Elohim said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." There's a couple of things potentially happening here. What we see later is a separation of fresh water from salt water happening in the later derivations of the myth. But I think what we're talking about, and as Genesis continues, God, Elohim, made the expanse and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. So we have the creation of division of a firmament. Now, they're not very explicit, but you see what Phanes is doing over here. He's creating a blueprint of division that will later be followed by all of the different successions of kings. He will be following each and every, or they will follow each and every kind of like blueprint and build on it as a foundation. And you see just more and more exploding outward of differentiation, of different things being developed before. Now, there's some interesting stuff here because originally the golden age of humanity, so they have like a golden, silver, bronze, and an iron age of humanity, started in the reign of Oranos, but some Neoplatonists retrofit it and say that Phanes built this world and there was a golden age under the idea of Phanes. I don't see how that's possible. um, they're talking about physics here. He brings forth the celestial lights. Now he is the embodiment of light, but later on we see more light created: Hyperion, Helios, Apollo, greater and greater refined pieces of light, or kind of like iterations, facsimiles. So I think what they're talking about here really is that he creates the idea that will later be brought into form once he copulates with Nyx, which is interesting because there's like a triad that gets mixed in here too, of her being there before, but then they're also within him, and then there after, which is very Neoplatonic. Everything's got to be blasted into threes. Even the egg is that way. They have three different versions of the egg, which I can't recall right off the top of my head. But then you see threes again here. O glorious Phanes, you are justice, prudence, and truth. I think everybody who is a Christian would agree that those are three things that God loves. Like, so again, we're talking about the same things here, just using different terms. Begotten of night. So here we see again, Phanes is begotten of night, but he also begets with her. They love saying beget in Genesis too. Um, Begotten of night, who shines with stars, and thus he did divide the world between the gods and the mortals. So again, over here, God made an expanse, separated the water from the water. Now we're made of water. This whole planet's made of water. Water, water, water everywhere. There's it's clear. The symbols are right here. You just have to want to read them. That's oh, I had more. But Phanes, he basically goes on to create the firmament too, and they talk about that in the next one. Oh man, I didn't prepare the last slide for my bit. I failed you guys. I'm sorry. But he goes on to talk about the firmament, and the Hebrew Genesis model does as well. There's a creation of the firmament, and then they go on to kind of talk about the second day. But I don't want to go into that yet because I want to talk about Nyx and her reign in this next live. Um, I don't know why I put this in here. Let's just read it. Museos of Perea, who glorify with songs, come hither, tell of the sacred race of the blessed immortal gods. From the beginning, those whom earth and wide heaven begot, and the dark winged night, and whom the salty sea brought forth. It's very poetic, and I think it's beautiful. The Hebrew narrative is condensed, it's scientific, it's very washed. It's just kind of purified of any of the pagan stuff. Um, and you can tell that they were in a hurry to copy it, because there's a lot of mistakes. But it's been refined since then, and it's again another beautiful narrative. But you can see they're talking about the same things. But what do we know about Orpheus and his theogony, his cosmology, the way that he was building this idea of how things came into being? We've got the egg, which is really interesting because it's just a basic container for the universe. A primordial egg with the unborn universe. An egg also is a great example symbolically of undifferentiated form. Everything within the egg, you see this, the egg as a shape is pretty uniform amongst all creatures. So naturally, there is some sort of program within nature that makes the egg the shape. Generally speaking, they're all kind of the same color. There's some differentiation in the color, but inside of each one is this soup, this mixture of earth and water. And from that egg can be birthed so many different things. You get snakes, you get birds, platypuses, whatever. It's a brilliant symbol for what the undifferentiated mass of the universe was beforehand. And then we start from also within this, Chronos and Ananke are really interesting concepts. Time and necessity. We have to have time in order for the universe to be, and we have to have an impulse, a necessity, a desire for things to be burst into this many forms. We have the emergence of light and the emergence of the polarity of gender, of the male and female. Phanes being an androgyne containing both male and female, which is later going to play out as we see everything kind of go forward. Nyx and Phanes, they mix, they create, and then you have the first marriage between Oronos and Gaia, and then you see it later in the Genesis myth as well with Adam and Eve. It's very important polarity that is being brought into existence in this first reign, and light and darkness. So it's the idea of differentiation, polarities, duality, and we see the attributes of Phanes as well, and the division of the cosmos. So that's basically what happens in the first part of the reign of Phanes. So, do you guys have any questions? Because I covered most of what I wanted to, and I forgot the part about Nyx. But I am going to open it up for a couple of questions before I cut the feed, and then let the fundamentalists go after me in the comments. Do, 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 do. I can see we had a few people on here, but eventually I hope to have a lot more coming on and just hopefully bothering me. I could deal with some differing opinions. I like them because they make me grow. They don't scare me. What did you guys think? Did I do a good job? I'm having fun with it, but it is it's interesting because you record a video beforehand versus a live, and a live is is just a whole nother animal. So I'm excited to do the next one. I'm going to do these on Fridays at the same time, and then we'll have them listed as playback. And I'm going to start doing members only lives too. So if you're interested in some of those, they'll be upcoming. It won't be anytime soon. I'm still trying to grow the channel, but oh, okay. So can I speak to why the Neoplatonists like the number 3? Well, they're obsessed with it to begin with. And I think it's because of the perfection of the Pythagorean symbol, the triangle. Everything kind of comes from that. The idea, and I think this is a lot of me that's being put into it. The idea of duality is anathema to a lot of people because of the division. And the people who are inclined with trying to find unity again find that the best way to do that is to synthesize the polarity. So find the sweet spot in between there. And in that sweet spot is generated a third point. So if we think about the ineffable as the stuff before the point, and then time being the first element, and then differentiation or that necessity being driven into that point. So if we're just at a point and then boom, we are driven down to another point and we create a line. That's just like the first piece of it, of creation. But when you generate a third point from that, you create a much more stable structure, geometrically speaking. And they became really obsessed with that as the foundation of reality. Is everything is these triads, and then triads within triads within triads. If you read Proclus, it's just a boatload of triads that just explode out into what we see today. And so for them, the idea of 3 is a sacred number. And I think it's really, it's not copied, but it's mirrored in what people are talking about with the Trinity in general. This idea goes back even to ancient Egypt of 3 being the most stable for creation or for understanding a concept. And I think it's true. If you look at like the Kabbalah, the tree of life as well, you have the different Sephirot. And in the different Sephirot, if you look at the 3 of any one given triangle you can draw out, it tells you what is in that layer of reality. So if you look at it from like a top-down construct, the top 3, look at all their different characteristics, how they interact, and that'll tell you everything you need to know about the attributes about that layer of reality or that hierarchy. Platypi. Yes, Tara, platypi. But that's, I think, why they were so obsessed with it. It's a stable structure geometrically. It makes a lot of sense for them as far as they're wanting to search for unity rather than duality. And that's what I got for you on that question, son. Sounded like I just replied to you as son. That's what I got for you, son. Anything else? I'm going to play that song again because it was fun.
A goddess of the sea shimmering through.
Yes, the supernal triad. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, you're talking about Keter, Kokma, Ina, the supernal triad.
Yo, check the mic, 1, 2. This ain't no illusion. It's the ancient gods demanding your attention. Museius, listen up. This knowledge is gold. How to pay respect. Stories untold. Zeus, Gaia, Helios, the moon and the stars. Neptune, ruler of the seas behind prison bars. Ceres bringing the harvest. Persephone too, queen of the underworld with a hellish crew. Artemis, the huntress. Apollo's bright rays. Dionysus, the life of the party. Always in the days. Ed Ray's got a war with Vulcan the Smith. Aphrodite, born of the ocean, the goddess myth. Hades, king of shadows where the lost souls reside. He be forever young, Hercules by her side. Elathea, bringer of life, new souls ignite. Justice and piety shining ever so bright.
Nymphs and Pan, the wild ones roaming free. Here are the queen, never seen memory. The grace is the hours keeping time and they dance. Leto, mother of gods, given a second chance. Purities, household guardians protecting the heart. Soteroid, offspring of Zeus, showing their worth. Idean gods, angels above them, be so wise. Night and day, faith and justice before our eyes. Chronos and Rhea, titans of old. They tis the sea, nymph stories yet untold. Oceanus, the river flowing down the world's spine. Atlas holding it up for all of time. Aeon, eternity, Chronos, endless time. Styx, the river of oaths, a power sublime. Daemon, spirits that guide in the air, earth and fire. Providence watching over, taking us higher. Dionysus and Semele, a love so true. Look at the goddess of the sea shimmering through. Palamon, a Drastri, a victory sweet song. Asclepius, the healer, righting every wrong. Athena, goddess of wisdom with her battle cry. Thunder and wind, storm in the sky. Aptis and Adonis, life, death and rebirth. The cycle continues upon this earth. Hecate, the triple goddess with keys to the night. Saffron veiled, wandering with spirits in sight. Persian huntress, untamed and bold, protecting the world, stories of old. Grant us success, bless our rights, accept our offerings burning bright. To the gods of Olympus and the depths below, we pay our respects, let our gratitude flow. Word up.